at QMath, a man of distinct vision and a fountainhead of illuminating ideas and inspiration to all of us. Driven by his passion for the subject, he wanted to find a way to help children overcome this fear and understand how maths is present in every aspect of life. A graduate from IIT Delhi, Manan formulated a new way of teaching the subject, a maths program called Maths by Reasoning. Founded in 2013, QMaths is steadily challenging the conventional way students have been taught maths, empowering the next generation of problem solvers and decision makers in the world. His perseverance and focused attitude speaks a lot about his personality. We are delighted to welcome you with us today. So without any further ado, I will request Manan sir to take the helm from here.
Yeah, hi. Lakshya, am I audible? Can you just confirm?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Thanks for introducing me. And hi, everyone who's listening in. First of all, wish you all a very happy new year and very glad to be speaking with all of you today as part of this event. So I'll keep this very short. I thought that today I'll share my experience in building QMath as a business and scaling it to multiple countries across the world. But let me start with a little bit of background, a little bit of recap of my story. So there were two things, I loved since childhood. One was math. Math was something I really enjoyed when I was a young kid. I was pretty good as well. And the other thing that I really liked was teaching, because both of my parents were university professors, and I used to see them, teaching all the time. So that kind of fascinated me quite a bit. So after school, I went to IIT Delhi for my graduation. But even before graduating, I'd started teaching math. I created a test business right when I was in college, and started teaching high schoolers math. So that's how my journey started in this space, and did that for the next many years, and ended up teaching maybe more than 10,000 students myself. So got a lot of deep expertise into how kids learn math, why they struggle or why they excel at it, and so on. And I think my biggest realization in that first phase of my career was that by the time a child, and all of you have gone through this journey recently, you must have written the IIT JEE entrance exam and so on. And you would have peers who maybe did not do so well, and did not end up in a good college and so on. And you would maybe agree with me when I say that as a teacher, I realized that by the time you reach senior grades, which is grades 9 onward, maybe grade 11 onward, and so on, your foundation has already been built in a certain way, and it's really hard to course correct, and it's really hard to fix it if it has gaps. So over and over, I saw every year in my first business that I had lots of students coming to me, but we had very little impact on them because of their foundation not being great, right? So that was the first kind of phase of my business, but ended up teaching a lot of students, more than 10,000 students, as I recall. And then ultimately, I sold that first business to another test prep player, and I decided to start QMath. And the idea at QMath was essentially start early. So do math again, but start early. And math is something that kids start learning right from kindergarten onward. So I decided to create a new kind of math learning system, a math learning program that would expose kids to math the right way from a very young age. So that was the idea at QMath. The idea was to make kids great at math, and the idea was to teach kids math by visualization, math by reasoning, and so on. So everything that a kid learns, they need to understand why it works. So for example, if it's the surface area of a cylinder, it's 2 pi r times h plus r. Most kids will memorize it, but I wanted to make sure that we create a program where each and every fact, theorem, formula that the kid learns, they actually understand why it works that way. So what we do today essentially is we run a live class platform where our teachers teach math to kids from across the world. So we have about 10,000 teachers now on the platform, and all of our teachers are based in India. And these teachers, they run math classes for kids from across the world, kids starting from kindergarten, going all the way up to grade 12. And we started in India, but because of the whole COVID phase kind of giving a huge fillip to tech space in general, we expanded rapidly outside the country over the last couple of years. So as of today, the US is our biggest market. So we have tens of thousands of students who are coming for our classes from the US, and the business is growing really fast. And this year we think we'll become a unicorn as well, and ultimately we'll end up building a huge business because math is a universal need. 1 billion kids across the world need to learn math, and we think we have really cracked a way to teach math to kids in a very powerful manner. So that's a little bit about what we do, what QMath is all about. But actually, what I wanted to really talk about is not so much QMath, but some of my learnings in this whole kind of experience of building QMath and scaling it and so on. And I think some of you might be contemplating starting up after college. Some of you may already have started up, and some of you may be deciding between taking up a job or starting right out of college. So I was one of those people who started right out of college. I've never done a job. I started right out of college, but I actually wanted to share my thoughts on what are the pros and cons of doing that, right? So and after this, happy to answer any questions that you might have. Anyway, so the first thing that I'll maybe say is that if you do decide to start up and build a business of your own, you have to remember that the journey is going to be tough and it is going to be long. It is going to be tough and it is going to be long, because that's the nature of compounding. And all of you are, you would have good math backgrounds. Compounding is something that takes time. So for your startup to succeed and become something big, that compounding power needs to kick in. It needs to happen, and that takes some time. And I tell every new entrepreneur that you have to be ready for putting in maybe 5 to 6 years if you really want to see your startup succeed. So that's actually the minimum, but the time might actually be more than that, right? And there'll be lots of ups and downs that you'll see. At QMath alone, for example, for two phases in my 8-year journey where I actually decided to shut the company down. And now when I look back at it, I came very close to kind of making that decision, but then ultimately I persevered and decided to kind of continue building it. And it's now that compounding is happening, and now that we are growing really fast, right? So it took a long time. So statistically speaking, you're more likely to fail if you start up, and these are the hard numbers. Especially if you're hoping to for a quick win, because quick wins rarely happen in the startup ecosystem. They do happen, but they rarely happen. So being perseverant and being resilient really matters. And so if you are deciding to kind of start up, and and starting up is really all fancy today, it's the rage today. But I do advise every new entrepreneur that they should be ready for a long haul, a tough and long journey, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is that because the journey is going to be tough and long, your reason for starting up has to be really clear. There's this very good speaker that I recommend all of you listen to. His name is Simon Sinek, and he's done a very good TED talk, and he calls it the why of what you do, right? So your why for starting up should be really clear. It should be a powerful North Star for you. It should be a problem that excites you. So for example, in the case of QMath, my why is I want kids to learn math in a different way, in a way where they see that math is really beautiful and math is really powerful, and math underlies everything around you. So that is my why. It really excites me. It helps me get up every morning and do what I do, and stick with the ups and downs and so on, right? So it's a powerful problem statement for me, and I think that by solving it, the world will be a better place. There'll be millions of better thinkers across the world and so on. So that why really excites me. So whatever reason you choose to start up, whatever why you choose to start up, has to appeal to you, has to be very exciting for you. The how and the what might change, but the why cannot change. So that's really important to understand. So in QMath, again, in the case of QMath, so our business model has changed, the way we deliver classes has changed, our curriculum has gone through multiple iterations and so on. So the how and the what has changed multiple times, but the why has never changed. The mission that we are on today is exactly the same as the mission we were on day one when we started the company 8 years back. So I think it's very important for you to figure out what your why is. And there should be, what I say, the way I articulate this is there should be a burning desire in your heart. There should be a terrifying longing in your heart to kind of, solve that why. So don't start up because starting up is a cool thing. It's not, for example, I've never done a job, but I've actually seen many people who have first done jobs and then started up have succeeded a lot more than those who have started up directly. So I don't think that starting up is more cool or less cool than maybe doing a job or something. In fact, statistically, more the startup founders I see, the ones who have succeeded, are likely to have worked earlier in the past, right? So if you do want to start up, if you do want to build a business, you need to be very clear why you're doing it, and that has to be the reason that drives you, not because starting up is a fancy thing right now. So that's the second thing, right? The why for starting up has to be very clear. The third thing is, what I call a very, very strong pulse on what your consumer thinks. So maybe you want to start up in the logistics space, maybe you want to start up in education, maybe it's healthcare that excites you, maybe it's I don't know, some Web3 application that you're thinking of and so on, right? So whatever it is, if it touches a consumer in some way, and the consumer could be an end retail user, or it could be an organization, it could be a school, it could be an institution, whatever, right? So you have to have a really, really strong understanding of your consumer. And you have to do a lot of what is called product discovery work. Because most startups that fail, many of them fail because they did not understand the problem clearly. They did not understand that there was even a need, or what exactly the outline of the need was, right? So this is critical, this understanding of the consumer, doing consumer discovery work, having an experimental mindset and running a lot of experiments instead of falling in love with the first idea that comes to your mind. That should not happen. You have to ultimately solve for the consumer. If you want to build a valuable business that people are willing to pay for, their problem has to be solved. So your idea, no one gives a shit about your idea, is the way you need to think about it, right? What consumers give a shit about is their problem being solved. So when you are kind of identifying the space and the problem, you have to figure out whether what you're building even solves the problem, or it's just some fancy tech that you like building, but no one will pay for it, right? And remember that you will most likely fail if you do not do this part properly, which is this consumer discovery work. So that's the third thing. Make sure that you have this experimental mindset and you talk to consumers constantly on a daily basis. You talk to consumers if you're kind of starting up, right? Then the fourth thing, I think this is an important consideration that I tell a lot of people thinking of starting up right out of college. Do you build the right team? And the right team starts with finding the right co-founder or set of co-founders. And generally what happens, I've seen a lot of college folks do, who start up right out of college, and even after that, maybe they do a couple of years of work and then they start up. The mistake they make is they think that because someone is their friend, that person should also become a co-founder. I think that should never happen. I think a friend relationship and a co-founder relationship are two very different things. If you are getting on someone as a co-founder, they should have shared values, shared work ethic. They should have the same desire, the same burning desire to solve the problem as you have, and so on. So have an open discussion. If you are kind of talking to someone, to become a co-founder or start up something together, have open discussions. No harm in that. But don't consider it an obligation to work together since you are friends. I think many startups fail because this founder co-founder relationship does not work out, because these were friends who started up, but they had very different visions of what they wanted to do, very different values, very different work ethics, and so on, right? So be thoughtful about who you get on as a co-founder. It's like a marriage. It's going to be a long-term thing. You can't step back if something doesn't go right, if it's a challenging phase, and so on. So you have to be really thoughtful about who you get on as a co-founder. The general advice I give is, firstly, obviously, you should know the person really well if you are getting into a co-founder relationship. And then maybe you have some kind of a light touch arrangement in the beginning. You try working together for 3 months or 6 months or something, and then you kind of go full into a formal relationship. So you can do that. And also, one mistake that I've seen, and this is because a lot of people come to me for this kind of advice. This is something that that I think you all should keep in mind. Those of you at least who are starting up, is you should have discussions about equity, compensation, roles, kind of who does what and so on. All of that should be very clearly kind of discussed upfront. Nothing should be left to ambiguity. The attitude should not be बाद में देख लेंगे, ये सब तो हो जाएगा. ऐसा नहीं होता है. It doesn't work that way. So you have to make sure that you kind of discuss all of this stuff upfront and make it clear, and make sure you're getting into a relationship with everything kind of clarified properly. So that's one on team building. The other thing is, your team won't be just your co-founders. You'll also be recruiting people. It could be interns, it could be full-time people, and so on. So how you recruit, how you run, and how you retain people is going to be a really, really important job as a founder or a co-founder of a company. So there are a lot of good resources on how to do that. I think a lot of young founders make the mistake of not taking their people seriously and not kind of investing in their in doing this the right way. So make sure you are putting in the right kind of effort. Lots of resources. John Doerr has a very good book on measure what matters, and so on. So there are lots of good books, lots of good resources on how to run teams. So make sure you're doing all of that, right? So that's the fourth thing: build a great team, choose co-founders carefully, and make sure you recruit, run, and retain your people, thoughtfully. So I think the last one, which I would like to say is, when I was in my final year at IIT Delhi, when I started my first business, I made a lot of mistakes, and looking back to that time, I could have shortened my path to this point by maybe 7-8 years if I had better mental models at that point, and if I had better knowledge and better frameworks at that point, right? I did not have a mentor who kind of advised me on this stuff. So I was doing a lot of stuff by trial and error. But I think in today's world, where the ecosystem has become even more competitive and things are moving much faster and so on, you can't afford to do things by trial and error. So what you need to do is you need to really invest on radically upgrading your mental models. I'm not just saying incrementally. I think what you've done in your 3 or 4 years at IIT pales in comparison to what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say you need to go on a crash course of reading the best people around the world. Maybe they are business leaders, maybe they are people who are great leaders, and so on. And there's lots of good books and lots of good resources. So you need to really go deep and study all of that in the next couple of years if you want to build a very big business, or even if you want to go progress a lot in a job that you want to take up, and so on, right? So radically upgrade your mental models, invest a lot of time in personal growth, read a lot, follow the right kind of people online, read their books, and so on. And this is about increasing your probability of success. I tend to see everything in terms of probabilities, right? So if you make a decision to start up today, or if you make a decision to join a company today, and you look at where you are as point A and you have to get to point B, so you have to maximize the probability of getting from point A to point B, right? And the way to do that is you make sure that your mental models are not lacking, so you don't make the wrong decisions at any point, and so on. And a lot of first-time founders make these mistakes. I've done a lot of them. My peers have done a lot of them, and many of them are doing really well right now. But it took them a long time, many years before they figured out the right way to approach things. And things meaning everything from how you kind of run people, how you run teams, how you set up a business, how you scale it, how you digitally grow something, how you build products, how you build usage loops that keep bringing people back to your product, and so on. So there's so many of these things that you need to do. You need to know if you want to run a really valuable business, and don't leave that to chance, and make sure you're investing all the effort to learn all of this stuff, right? So as I said in the beginning, that QMath is about to become a unicorn. Ultimately, I think QMath will become a really big global brand. I think we'll be a 50 billion company at some point, because we'll be the world's largest math brand. We have a unique way of doing math that works, that's very powerful, that kids love, that parents love, and so on. But it took us a long time to get here. It took me a long time to get here, relatively speaking, because a lot of mistakes were made on the way. So hope that some of these inputs that I've shared today prevent you from making the same mistakes. And maybe let me just try and recap the 4 or 5 points I said. So the first thing I said was, and this is relevant to those people who are thinking of starting up, but also parts of it are relevant for those people who are thinking of joining some company or joining some existing startup, and and kind of growing there. Because in today's world, even the best jobs require you to have an entrepreneurial mindset. So these learnings apply everywhere, right? So the first thing I said was that the journey is going to be tough and long, so be prepared. Your why for doing something, building something, starting up on something has to be very clear. The how and the what can change, but the why has to be very clear. It has to be a burning desire, a problem that you want to solve. It should excite you from the bottom of your heart, and it's okay to take some time to figure that out. Maybe you work for 2 years and then you decide what you want to work on, and so on. That's anyway a more likely chance of path to success, even if you eventually want to help, right? The third thing I said was have a really strong pulse on what your consumer thinks. Have an experimental mindset, run a lot of conversations, experiments, and so on. Consumers don't give a shit about your idea, so don't fall in love with your idea. Fall in love with solving for the consumer. Fall in love with solving for the problem the consumer has, and you will definitely succeed. The fourth thing I said was build a great team. Choose your co-founders thoughtfully, and make sure the people you get on board your team, they are firstly like of really high caliber. And then the way you recruit, run, and retain your people is really important. So invest some time in figuring out how the best people around the world do this. And then the fifth thing, and perhaps the most fundamental thing I said was that, for me, for example, for many of my peers, the 4 years at college at IIT Delhi, even though it was one of the top colleges in the country, the kind of learning we had there was limited in many ways. But if you want to do something valuable in the real world, you have to go much deeper into things, and you have to have like really strong mental models, so that you don't learn by trial and error, and you don't make a lot of mistakes that are time consuming. So invest a lot of time in upgrading your mental models, read a lot. I suggest that your goal should be reading about 50 books a year. So that's 50 books a year. Because if you're able to do that, and those books should be thoughtfully picked. And there are lots of blogs and all that people have written on which books to choose if you want to build something of your own and so on. But read about 50 books a year, and then we are talking about being in that orbit where you are upgrading your mental models at a fast enough rate, right? So yeah, so those are some thoughts from me. Best of luck to all of you. And if you need any further inputs, you can reach me on LinkedIn, or you can reach me on Twitter as well. But yeah, so Lakshya, if there are any questions, happy to answer those at this point.
Yeah, so it was an indeed enjoyable session. So guys, you can type your questions in the chat box. If you have any questions, we can now open up for Q&A session. So there is a question by Bharti. It says, which book would you suggest?
Okay. So as I said, I'm talking about 50 books a year. So you have to read a lot of books. But if you want to, let's say, start up, and if you want to understand how a new entrepreneur should approach the problem of building something new, so there are 3 or 4 books that I can recommend. So one is Inspired by Marty Kagan. This book talks about how do you build great products, how do you build products that that people kind of love, that's all solve for a consumer need. So that's one, that's Inspired. Then there's this book called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. This book talks about how do you go from 0, where nothing exists, to 1, where something exists. And this is basically the hardest part of building a business. So how do you do that, right? So that's 0 to 1. And then there is a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. This is a book by Ben Horowitz. Again, very highly recommended for people who are just thinking of starting up. So maybe start with these 3 books, just to get a sense on how you should approach this process. But once you read these 3 books, then a lot of new avenues will open up. Within these books and elsewhere, you'll find people talking about, okay, if you read this, now you read this and so on. But this could be a good starting point.
Yes,
Okay.
that was good. So this is a question by Raj. He wants to ask, what were the difficulties that you faced?
Yeah, so and I think there's another one. How difficult was it to raise funding in the early stage? So maybe I'll answer both of them together. So see, the first phase is always very messy and very difficult. The 0 to 1 phase, because in mathematical terms, I don't know if you guys remember your studies from vectors, but a non-zero vector has a direction, right? But a zero vector has no direction. So when your startup or your idea is a 0 vector, how do you decide which direction to scale in, right? Or which direction to proceed in? So that's the hard part, right? So they're having a very fast, iterative, experimental mindset where you are constantly talking to the consumer, that really helps. So let's say you are deciding to launch an app for healthcare for diabetes patients, right? I'm just making this up. But instead of falling in love with your idea, which is I will build some app, which has this fancy interface and it will do this and that, you should go talk to 100 diabetes patients and figure out what their problems are, what their needs are, and so on, and quickly identify, okay, what are the gaps, what are the pain points, and this is what I'm going to address. And in the initial phase, I always suggest try to do stuff in as non-tech a way as possible, because building tech is costly in terms of time and in terms of resources. So try to do stuff, without using any tech, and see if what you are offering actually solves the problem of the consumer or not, right? So I think that's one thing. Related to that is the process of fundraising. So we have raised close to $100 million so far. We'll raise a lot more this year. But I think the initial phase of raising, today it's become a lot easier because lots of capital influx has happened into the ecosystem and so on. But because a lot of capital has flown in, a lot of more startups have also gotten created. So the competition has increased, right? So if you want to maximize your chances of raising funds, there are 3-4 things that a potential investor will look for. You should have a very, very clear understanding about the problem statement, about the exact gap that you're going to address. That's one. Then you have to have a very clear understanding of how big the market is for that problem. So maybe let's say a service that teaches you let's say classes for mouth organ as an instrument, right? Very niche, very narrow need. But let's say a platform for healthcare for chronic disease patients is a much larger TAM, TAM, that's called a target addressable market. So the TAM for your problem has to be big, because that's how you'll build a valuable business in that. So you have to be very clear about that. And then you have to be very clear about what is called the distribution model, which essentially means, okay, you have a product, you have an app, or you have some platform and so on. But how do you get that platform or that solution into the hands of as many customers as possible? And how do you grow your solution? How do you scale your solution? Do you do digital advertising? Do you go on TV? Do you have some referral or organic loops and so on? So having clarity about that helps, right? So the understanding of the problem statement, the TAM, the distribution model, I think all of these things really help. But the best thing of all is, and which kind of guarantees a fundraise, by the way, guys, if you really want to maximize the chances, is if you have a paying consumer base already with you. So if you have 100 consumers already paying for your solution, that's a huge validation of what you're building, is going to is valuable, and people are paying for it. So I always suggest to new entrepreneurs, first build something, get some traction, get some people paying for it, and that basically gives investors a lot of confidence that okay, this is something that people will value. So hey, let me put my money in this, right? So yeah.
Okay, so that was very insightful. So the next question is, when do you think the idea is good enough to start working upon?
So it's an iterative process. There's no kind of set kind of point saying, okay, this is where I say, okay, yes or no. It's never a yes or no decision. It's always, scaffolded. It's always iterative. So let's say you want to do, again, like taking the example of you want to build a platform for diabetes patients in India, right? And you have some specific point of view saying, okay, my mother is a diabetes patient and she's facing, all these problems and no one is addressing those. So this is what I want to address. So the first thing you'll do is maybe you'll go talk to 100 diabetes patients and you will validate whether there is a genuine need for what you're saying or not, right? So let's say that you say, okay, there's a genuine need. Then you look at, okay, what are the existing players doing? Are they serving that need properly? Are they not serving that need properly, and so on, right? So you kind of run these series of experiments, tests, research, and so on, where the confidence kind of increases iteratively. And then you start building, and even when you start building something, you don't do it right away. You don't build a fancy app from day one, right? You actually build something that's non-tech, that runs off Google Sheets and Excels and so on, and where you're kind of doing a lot of manual stuff on the back end, and then you see whether consumers are paying for it. So I think, but if I had to say, okay, what is a yes or no validation of your idea? It's whether consumers have started paying for it or not. And if consumers have started paying for it, there's no better validation. No one else is going to, no matter who that person is, no matter how smart they are, if the consumer is paying for something, that thing works, right? And if you're able to demonstrate that, okay, right now I have 100 consumers, but the market for this solution is 1 million consumers or whatever, then you have a real pitch. And you don't need anything else. You don't need to be a fancy speaker. You don't need to have like, lots of, strong people on your team and so on. What you need is consumer love. If you can get consumer love, if you can get 100 consumers to pay for your idea, for your service, product, app, whatever, I think you have real validation. The other kind of the flip side to this is there are some products where you don't think of monetization from day one, right? You want to build reach. You want to build, for example, a content platform or something that scales to millions of users, but you'll figure out monetization later. That is also possible, but those businesses are generally much harder to scale in today's world, because a lot of the low hanging fruit has already gone away. Like a lot of people have already built content platforms, communities and so on, where a lot of the user base has already gravitated towards. So there you need to have a really sharp idea. You need to have really sticky numbers in terms of consumers coming back to your platform and using it. So let's say you build a dating app, right? So you need to figure out, okay, I will not monetize from day one. I'll first build a community of 10 million users who use my dating app, right? But then the metrics for your dating app have to be better than Tinder and Bumble. The stickiness, the matches, and so on. It has, the interface or the product has to do something that's far better than Tinder or Bumble for users to come to your platform. And that's obviously hard, but yeah, you may have a point of view there. Yeah.
Yes, so true. So the next question is, how difficult was it to raise funding in early stage of QMath?
Yeah. So as I said, it was. I mean, the first couple of rounds were very difficult. Because the idea was new, and a lot of people were asking me this question, saying, "Okay, what are you going to do that's different in math? Math is something that people have been doing for a century, 2 centuries, whatever, in a certain way. So what will you do differently, and so on." But it was, so I had to bootstrap that first startup. That first phase, I had to put in some of my own capital, borrow money from here and there. So it was not a very easy phase. And as I said, this is the reason you need to be perseverant, because there'll be lots of phases where you'll kind of say nahi ho raha yaar, let's just give up, right? So I had one of those phases where I ran out of money, and I said, okay, let's like screw this, let's shut this down, right? But then I said, but the why was very compelling for me. The fact that I had a point of view on how math learning should be done. I had taught in the past. I knew there was a certain way that if kids learn math this way, they're going to like really excel on the subject and so on. So I kept on at it and so on. So the first couple of rounds, raising the first $5 million maybe was a bit difficult, when we had to convince investors that we have this unique way of doing math and so on. But I think what really helped was consumer love. We had like we had a small but really really loyal customer base. Teachers and parents who said, look, this is way better than anything else we have seen in any other school or any other learning platform and so on. So I think that really helped. After that, it was more about business metrics. Are we scaling? Do we have a large enough market? So for example, our last round, which was when we raised more than $40 million, was last year, where we saw huge growth because of COVID lockdowns across the world, and we had students coming from across the world, including the US and so on. So we saw massive growth on our user base, and that really gave a lot of investors confidence that these guys are scaling very fast. So I think in the initial phase, it's more about validation. It's more about, do you even have a product or not? It's more about what is called PMF, product market fit. Does your product fit with the market, right? Is there a fit, or you are just kind of in your own bubble, and what you're building has no appeal at all, right? So initial phase is a lot more about that. Later phase is a lot more about business growth, metrics, quality of growth. So for example, for every dollar of revenue that you're earning, how much are you spending? So if you are spending $5 of revenue of cost to get in $1 of revenue, that's not a great equation, right? So investors will look at all of that, but that comes later. In the starting phase, that's not really a consideration.
Yes, so that was wonderful. So this is a question by Tarang. He wants to ask, how far does this tag of IT matters in a future life?
Yeah. See, it does matter. I would not say it doesn't matter. It does matter to some extent, especially in the initial phase of your career. Having the IIT association gives you some credibility right off the bat, but it quickly reaches a point where beyond that it doesn't work. So let's say if you want to raise a round of capital and so on, yeah, maybe you will get introductions more quickly than someone who's not from an IIT. But an investor will not put in their money into your startup because you're from IT. Those days are gone. When that used to happen, your idea needs to really work. It really needs to have consumer love. It really needs to demonstrate that yes, there's a market for this and so on. And that's how you'll achieve actual success. But you will get a lot of head starts, in a way, small head starts. Like you'll get introductions faster. The IIT network is great, right? So your seniors from IIT will introduce you to someone that, hey, why don't you meet this guy and so on. So all that will happen. So you'll get some head starts, but those won't translate to real success. For real success, you will have to go deep, and you will have to solve some really proper customer problem. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So the next question is by Govind. He wants to ask, as you said, building a good team is a must. So in your initial days, what qualities did you look for in a person willing to join for you?
Yeah, so I would say in the initial days we made a lot of mistakes. We were not very thoughtful about whom we hired and so on. But I think so. Here's my philosophy for hiring. Right, I think you should hire slow. There's a lot of this gyan in the startup ecosystem that you should hire fast and fire fast. I don't think that works. I've seen enough cases, enough kind of examples now. What you should do is you should have a really high bar of caliber. You should say, okay, I'm not going to hire someone who's below this threshold, and then you wait. You don't get the next person in who doesn't clear that bar. Yeah, you actually wait, and you kind of uh, find the person who clears that bar and get that person in, rather than saying, okay, I have to optimize for time, and so let me get anyone in, right? So your bar for excellence has to be really, really, really high, and I can't overemphasize this enough, right? It's like really important. There has to be values match. Obviously, all of that stuff has to be there. Person has to be honest, high on integrity, and so on. But I think the raw ability, in terms of, could be in terms of very sharp insight on something, could be in terms of work ethic. Maybe some person is like not as sharp, but like, has a really strong work ethic. Yeah, that person also clears a high bar and so on, right? So you have to decide your high bar for the kind of business you want to build. And but then you have to insist on hiring people who clear that high bar, and you cannot kind of dilute those standards. I was reading somewhere very interesting line that someone said that, whatever startup or company you build, the culture of that company is set by the worst behavior or performance you're willing to tolerate. So worst behavior or performance, so your minimum threshold of behavior or performance below which you say this is not acceptable. That threshold is what decides the culture of a company, right? So if you keep it high enough, then you ensure that, okay, people always stay above that threshold. But if you are lax with it, if you dilute those standards, then you're in for troubling times.
Yes, sir. It was quite insightful. So the next question is how to calculate market size of an idea.
Yeah, there are lots of ways to do it. And actually, you should always what is called in electronics, in radio communication, it's called triangulation. So when you have to determine the distance of the location of a source, right? You kind of use multiple receivers to determine where it is located, right? So the same way you have to triangulate your market size. You have to look at multiple different ways. It could be bottom up, it could be top down, and so on. So let's say if I had to calculate the size of the market size for QMath, right? So how would I do it? So one approach is, I would say, okay, my service costs, let's say in the US, it costs $100 a month. So how many people are already paying $100 a month? So I could look at other players. I could look at school-going students who take after-school tutoring and combine all of that and say, okay, multiply by $100 a month, and that's my market size for the US, right? But I could also think of this as market creation. So I could say, okay, maybe not everyone who could sign up for a QMath service is right now going to a math tutoring service. So there is also actually going to be some market creation that happens, because I'm coming out with such a great way of learning math, which is very different from normal tuition services. So there will be many consumers who have never taken a tuition service in the past who will kind of sign up for this, right? So that's market creation. You're expanding the market. So for estimating that, I could go top down. I could say, okay, the US population is 300 million. Of that, this percentage is school-going students. Of that, this percentage is school-going students who have, let's say, this threshold family income, so they'll be able to pay $100 a month, and so on. And of that, I will capture, let's say, 10%. So you should always estimate market capture at, let's say, 10-15% in steady state, right? And that gives you another metric for your market size. Then the third way you could estimate that is a lot of reports are already out there. So a lot of agencies, consultancies, research firms have done analysis of different verticals and different spaces. So you could just read some of those reports and figure out your market size. But I think it's important to triangulate, and it's important to be honest about your market size, because if you make a mistake here, see, so the way to think about this is, if you are going to, whether you build a $1 million startup, a $10 million startup, $100 million startup, or $1 billion startup, or $100 billion startup, it's going to take you the same amount of time. Yeah, so you have to remember this. Whether you choose whatever you choose to build, it's going to take you the same amount of time. So you might as well choose as large a canvas as possible. You might as well choose as large an opportunity as possible to build something. And therefore, you should be clear when you start off whether what you are building is going to be a large enough canvas or not. Don't start painting directly. First, take a step back, take a 30,000 feet point of view and say, okay, the canvas is pretty large. So in QMath's case, for example, math is a universal need. 1 billion kids across the world go to need to learn math. So the need is universal. So the market size is huge. You can just kind of intuitively say it. But let's say classes for teaching mouth organ as a musical instrument, you already know that, okay, this is going to be like really niche need, right? So you have to be thoughtful and honest about, okay, I have identified this problem, but how big is it going to be? Because you don't want a ceiling, right? You don't want, because you're going to spend many years here and so on. You want to ensure that your canvas is as large as possible. So this is not just an exercise you do for investors. It's an exercise that's important for you to do for yourself as well. You owe it to yourself to do this exercise properly. Otherwise, you will end up spending the next decade on something that never even scales. And you don't want to do that, right? So yeah.
Yes, wonderful. So the next one is, how's your experience in leading and making such a great team of QMath?
Yeah, so it takes time. It takes, as I said, in our case, we also made a lot of mistakes. We also did a lot of things by trial and error. But I think now, when you look at how some of the best companies in the world are being run, it could be Google, could be Netflix, and so on. You have a lot of books and a lot of resources that people have written about on how to run companies, how to run teams. So Google, for example, uses this framework called OKRs, objectives and key results. And that's how they manage the company. And that's considered a very powerful way to run a company and a way to run the business, right? Intel, for example, had a similar approach. So I think it's important to be thoughtful about how you manage your team, how you manage, and it starts right from recruiting. And when a person comes into contact with your company for the first time, right? So you have to stand for excellence. You have to have the right kind of processes of hiring, of retaining people, and so on. And all of that stuff takes time, and you will make mistakes, so that's okay. But you have to put in the effort to read the state of the art before you start doing all of this. And by state of the art, I mean how Google is managed, how Netflix is managed, how some of these great companies are managed. So read all of that upfront, and you'll get a lot of ideas, and then you can adapt them to your context and take it from there. But in general, if there are one or two underlying principles, I think it's this principle I spoke about, that the culture of your team, and could be just a 2% team, or it could be a 200% team, but the culture of your team is determined by the worst behavior or performance, the minimum behavior or performance threshold you're willing to tolerate. So if you set that bar, that okay, below this is not acceptable, could be anything, could be your work ethic, could be your commitment to the mission, could be the way you solve problems, and so on. So you say, okay, below this, I will not accept anything that happens in my team. That automatically sets a lot of the culture, because then people know, okay, इससे नीचे तो जा नहीं सकते, it won't even be acceptable. So you set that minimum threshold, and you say, okay, above this is, so it's like the IIT cutoff, right? So you say, okay, below this, you won't even get in. So it's like an analogous to that.
So that was an amazing answer. So next question is by Sajal. He wants to ask, should we worry about profitability at start or at a later stage?
See, it depends on which space you're working in. If you are going to build a business that, let's say, the model for the business is going to be, I will have 100 million consumers on my platform, and I will monetize a part of them, on some service or some product or through some advertising channel and so on, right? That's a different way to build a business versus, let's say, you say, okay, I'm going to provide a one-to-one coaching service for chronic healthcare patients. That's a different kind of service. It's not a content play. It has very different dynamics and so on. So for the second kind of business, you will need to think whether even in the steady state, this business is going to be profitable or not. So let's say the amount of money you spend on the healthcare provider is going to be more than the amount of money you ever recover from the patient, right? So there's also always, if there's always going to be that mismatch, even in steady state, for whatever reason, because maybe the healthcare provider is too expensive and so on, then you are never going to have a profitable business, and that's not a great situation to be in. But if you say, okay, I will scale now, I will not worry about profitability now, but there is a path to profitability. This is how I could get profitable. That's a different line of thinking, right? So you say, I will not worry about it now. I will not do it now, but I know how to get there. I know how to get to the summit, right? That's a different situation. So yeah, in some cases that applies. So many startups are startups where there's no focus on profitability in the business, but that doesn't mean that they don't know how to do it. They have deliberately chosen not to kind of do profitability right now because they're investing in growth. They want to get a lot of users into the ecosystem, into their platform. So let's say Uber and Ola in their initial days, the way they scaled was their approach was to get as many drivers and as many riders onto the platform, because they knew that the more riders and the more drivers, the more successful the platform is going to be, and profitability will come later, because then maybe they'll increase prices, maybe they'll optimize and so on, right? And that's what happened. So ultimately, they started aiming for profitability later. Same with Zomato, same with some of these other startups. The first focus was to scale and build the user base, and then get to profitability. But not even knowing how you will get profitable is a bit risky, in my opinion, right? There have been cases where profitability has also been figured out later. But yeah, I mean, I would say those are rarer. I would say the more successful ones at least know how to be profitable, even if they don't choose to focus on profitability in the beginning. Yeah.
Yes, so thank you for answering this one. So the next question is by Gautam. IT Delhi is the Indian college with most unicorn startups. So what is it that IT Delhi does different from rest of the colleges? Did you experience that during your 5 years at IT Delhi?
So I think I don't know if they do anything different than maybe IT Guwahati or whatever, but I think one of the things that's happened is um, it could be partly because it's located the location of the campus and so on, right? But IT Delhi folks have been very networked with folks from outside, and Delhi being the capital, there have been other networks that these folks have tapped and so on. So I think for some reason the initial wave of startups that became successful came from the IT Delhi folks, many of them at least. And then from there, their network started to grow. Then IIT Delhi person would he would know some junior from college, so he would hire that person, and then the team would expand from there, and then that person would go on to do another startup and so on. So I think the seed was partly chance of location and chance of being in the capital city. That's how the seed of this was sown. But after that, it was just kind of the network consolidating and compounding happening and so on. I don't think, by the way, that the campus or the courses are any different than the other ITs. I think the same caliber of people go elsewhere as well, including IT Guwahati, including the other ITs and so on. And I think in today's age, at least, you have universal access to all kinds of information, to all kinds of resources, books, talks, and so on. So I don't think that location factor is a constraint anymore. I think this is just, you are seeing an outcome now that actually started maybe 7-8 years back, when the entrepreneurship wave was just starting off, and the initial folks happened to be from IT Delhi campus. Yeah.
Yes, amazing. So the next question is, choosing whom to share your idea with is a crucial decision. So how do we know that we can share our idea with someone?
Yeah. So see, I always tell new entrepreneurs that your idea is only 1% of your ultimate success, right? 99% is going to be execution. In fact, I actually go one step further and say you should talk about your idea as much as possible, as openly as possible, because it's very likely that your idea doesn't have potential. Right? Statistically speaking, more ideas don't have potential than the ones who do have potential, right? That's the statistics, right? So it's better actually to go all around and talk about your idea, because people will calibrate. People will tell you, okay, but I think yahan pe aisa hona chahiye. I think this doesn't have potential. I think this is potential, and so on. So you will get a lot of validation very fast if you talk about it openly and if you talk about it without hesitation. I think gone are the days when when you have to fear that, okay, I'll just speak about an idea and someone else will do it. That doesn't happen anymore, because no one is going to be as passionate about your idea as you are, firstly, and secondly, your ideas anyways in its raw phase, it won't be so great, so you'll only be helped by talking about the idea with other people. So I don't think it's a critical decision in that sense. I think you should just speak about it openly, and you should speak about it as much as possible and so on. But when it comes to choosing a co-founder to work with on an idea, then you have to be really thoughtful. You have to, as I said earlier, you have to select for the right set of values and ethics match and so on. But if you're just worried that you'll share your idea with someone and then they'll just cut you out and do it on your own, that's not going to happen. That's like really, really unlikely. So yeah, don't worry about that.
So this is a question by me, like, when should we think that we should patent our idea? Like we
patent.
have an idea.
Yeah, I think patent first. Patent firstly. You should patent ideas only if they are like deep, what I call deep tech. They actually. So let's say you came up with a new business model. That's not really worth patenting, right? If anything, you should actually focus more on execution of that business model rather than trying to protect it through some IP and so on. Because smart lawyers will always figure out how to beat that patent and like do the same thing in a different way. But if it's deep tech, let's say you figured out a new way to achieve high bandwidth Bluetooth communication, for example, right? That's something that you should patent, because IP protection for such things is more structured and better understood than IP protection for business models or apps or interfaces and so on. So yeah, you should just be clear what you're trying to patent. If it's deep tech, then yeah, go ahead and do it. And if it's a genuine improvement over something that exists right now, then you should patent it. But otherwise, it's not worth the effort. It's not worth the pain, and you will not make much from that patent anyway.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the next question is, IITs have a huge network of highly successful alumni spread across the world. So does it help anyway in your startup journey? Even IIT Delhi has produced many angel investors like Sandeep Singhal, sir, etc. So does it make getting funding slightly less complex?
So yeah, the network helps, as I said, but I think today we are in a situation where exposure and democratization of these opportunities has become a lot more. And I think whatever advantage IIT Delhi would have had earlier is not such an advantage anymore. I think a person sitting in any college, whether it's IIT Guwahati, whether it's any other IIT or even a non-IIT, if they have a good idea, if they have the right mental model, if they're smart about how they are pitching the idea and so on, there's no dearth of opportunities. There's enough capital in the market. There are so many angel investors now. There's so many syndicates now, which is a collection of angels who are investing and so on. That access to capital is not an issue anymore. Let me kind of repeat it again, because it's an important point. Access to capital is not a problem anymore if you have a good idea and if you have a good way to execute on that idea. I think it's the latter that is the problem. In most cases, ideas are not great, or if the idea is great, then the person does not have a good path to execution, or they don't have a great team, and so on. So it's this latter stuff that is more challenging now, rather than the former stuff of okay, how will I get capital? That's not a problem anymore. It was a problem in India maybe 10 years ago when capital was limited, but as of today, there's enough and more capital in the ecosystem that you will not have an issue raising capital if the other checkboxes are ticked, right? So yeah, minor advantage of the IIT Delhi network, but I would say not a deal breaker. I mean, it doesn't matter so much. Yeah.
Yes, amazing. So we'll move on to the last question for the day. So how has the startup culture in IITs changed according to you from time to time as you were in IIT Delhi?
So when I was graduating, which is 2007, so that's about 14 years back, the fraction of people starting up was far lesser. In fact, from my batch, like there were like really very few people who started up right out of college. Most people took up jobs and so on. But I think that fraction has increased steadily because the risk has gone down. So I always tell people it's not risky anymore. You could choose to try your hand on a startup for 2 years if you're really committed and if your why is clear and so on, all the other things I said, right? So you could try building a startup for 2 years. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back to a job and so on. And the other thing to kind of remember, the other thing people have realized is the conventional kind of metrics of success don't apply anymore. So what salary you're getting in a job is not so exciting anymore as, hey, I could build $1 billion business, right? That's far more exciting. The outcome is far bigger. So a lot of the IIT folks have started realizing that it's better to take that risk when time is on your side. You try something, and if it clicks, it clicks. It could become really big. So there's this, for example, this recent grocery startup, right? 10 minutes delivery startup, Zepto, that's come up, which is started by two dropouts and so on. So you see a lot of such cases where people are starting right out of college because the perceived risk is a lot lesser now. But this was not the case 10 years back. 10 years back, the safest route was you have to take up a job, and a high-paying job, right? And could be an investment bank and so on. But I think the most fashionable thing right now is to start up on something, and it's a good thing. I think it's good for the ecosystem, and I definitely encourage everyone to try it. But their why should be clear, and their mental model should be powerful for the chance of success to be high. If you don't have a burning problem that you want to solve, then there's no point starting up. You might as well do a job, take up a great job somewhere, figure out what excites you, and then you kind of take the plunge, but not right away. Yeah.
Yes, sir, that was insightful. So, thank you, sir, for joining us today. We had a great time interacting with you. Our team is
Thank
most
you, Lexi.
grateful to you for your kind efforts. And I would also like to thank our audience for being with us today. Hoping to see you soon in the next one. Till then, stay safe and stay happy. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.